Welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast, your one-stop for practical and useful clinical information, masterful insight from experts in the field, and a guide to daily living. Thank you for joining us. And as always, Paul and I are excited to bring you another episode. And today, focusing in a little different way than we have in recent episodes.
It's a topic actually that I think was kind of on the table from even the conception of Psyched to Practice, but really never came to fruition, but really talking about some of the business aspects of practice and talking about the different mindset that you're needing to have when approaching kind of from just clinical work into this entrepreneurial side. We had the pleasure of talking with Jana Parker about this. And, she was just a wealth of knowledge and really kind of also cool to hear her story and her experience as she navigated through this.
Yeah, as Jana will say in the episode, she and I connected about a year ago, and it was actually at a conference. We were both presenting at a conference in New York, and she came up and introduced herself. And since then, we've had this kind of connection of, I've been on her podcast. We've chatted a number of times and really looking at hoping to do some more things together. For those that don't know Jana Parker, she's a licensed educational psychologist in private practice in California. She's board certified in school neuropsychology. And prior to private practice, she was a program specialist for 4 years and a school psychologist for 12 years. Jana owns Empower LEP, which is a resource aspiring practicing psychologists in private practice. And she's also the owner of private practice Mind by Design. So was really great to hear her story because she really has gone from this idea of working in an agency and really what that process was to be an entrepreneur.
With that, we hope you enjoy this practice in action episode, Empowered to Take a Leap of Faith.
So Jana, welcome to the Psyched to Practice podcast. It's great to have you joining us.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So, over the past year, I've seen you a bunch of times. I feel like a number of conferences we've been at together. We're excited to have you talk a little bit about kind of your journey today and really kind of focusing on this idea of people transitioning into business and entrepreneurship. So I guess maybe to start, tell us a little bit about kind of how you got into school psychology and then how did you get into being a business guru?
I don't know if I'd call myself a guru, but I play one on TV.
There you go.
So I was a psych major. I went straight to graduate school because my parents told me if I didn't continue, I would never go back. I don't actually at this point know what they were talking about because they never even graduated college. When they said, well, what are you going to do if you don't go to school? And I said, well, I actually have no idea what you do when you graduate college. So I might as well just keep going to school. So I initially went to a PsyD clinical program, but I was too young and not ready just in any way to do that. But I was introduced to school psychology while I was in that program. So I quit. I waitressed and bartended for a bit and then went back to school once I got accepted to another program. And I went to a school psych program. And in California, it's actually quite popular to do this with a master's degree. And there are very few doctoral level programs in California, especially back when I was in school. And it never occurred to me that I should do anything different because I knew I wanted to practice in schools. I knew I wanted to do that investigative, amazing work of problem solving and figuring out how to support kids. But along the way, I also knew that in California, they have this very cool license called Licensed Educational Psychologist. And you can get that as a master's level, specialist level school psychologist after 3 years of practicing as a school psychologist. And you take a test and you become able to practice educational psychology in a private practice setting. And so I didn't know how I was going to use it, but I, of course, being the A-type school psychologist that I am, I got that license immediately. And then I went through several more years until I got the opportunity to work in somebody else's private practice alongside my school psychology work. So I was still full-time in schools, but I worked part-time in a private practice. It was a doctor's office. We had a multidisciplinary team, and it was amazing, great training ground, and really led me into this different world of thinking about things differently, answering parents' questions about how their kids were learning rather than just determining eligibility for special education. And I just loved it. It elevated my school psychology practice, just having that experience with families in a different kind of way. And it also made me realize how much I loved that. I loved the autonomy, the flexibility, the ability to be transparent and say what I wanted to say to them, not having any barriers around that. So after transitioning into a more administrative role in schools, I realized, this is not the path for me. I really think I want to have my own practice. And so I transitioned into my own practice in 2020. And I was in schools for a total of 16 years. And at year 14, I guess, is when I started my own practice. And then by 2022, I completely transitioned out. And so now it's been almost 5.5 years that I've been in my practice. And I grew it from me to a team of, I think we're 13 right now.
Wow.
And I have a multidisciplinary thing going on. So I have licensed educational psychologists as well as educators. So we do reading, writing, math, and executive function, and also some SLPs. So it's very exciting.
Yeah. And you decided to start a business in the middle of COVID.
I started first. COVID decided
to happen. Oh, right.
to
Okay.
happen. Yeah. But that worked out because I was at home doing my job. And so I had the flexibility there, even though I was in meeting after meeting after meeting, I still had the ability to have just more flexibility and create what I was creating. And having a tiny little private practice office, people would still come because it was just me and the kids. There was only 1 month that I didn't have any assessment clients. I think it was April of 2020. Wow. Other than that, it was fine.
Yeah. Well, that leads to some things we'll talk about here in a little bit. But I think sometimes we think there's all these barriers to making a transition. And COVID was a big one for a lot of businesses, and we all still survived. You know, at the end, there was still a way through it. So yeah, that's great. It's and it's so I guess maybe kind of leading into kind of from that, the psychologists or mental health professionals, I think in general, we kind of go into this wanting to help other people, right? We don't think about I don't think people think of themselves as business people, so, what do you think is kind of a mindset shift that you needed to have to kind of decide that you're going to be a business owner or you're going to be an entrepreneur? What was that transition like?
Well, it was hard. We don't think of ourselves as business people. I didn't even, when you have those moments and you're working in the school system, maybe you've had this, and you go, you know what, I'm going to look at LinkedIn and just see what else is out there. And you're like, what are all of these jobs? I have no idea what product manager, compliant. I have no idea. I don't know any of that. And I never even took an economics class in college because I just never, ever thought I would need to know anything like that. I could not have imagined myself a business owner ever. But then you grow up, and then you kind of go through some changes and you go, you know what? I've gone into different school systems. I've started new processes. I've helped develop programs. I've managed a budget. You kind of get a sense and see how things work. And I always say that all the experience that I had in schools helped me in what I do now, but that business piece was still just a huge unknown. And so I had to really think, how am I going to do this? So I immediately got a coach, as I thought I need somebody who has done something like this before. So I reached out to a private practice owner in my town who had a therapy group practice and hired her for coaching. And that really helped me kind of get my mind around what I needed to do to set myself up. And we did visioning exercises and we talked about the logistics and the planning and how was I going to do this, but also manage a full workload because I had already been doing private practice on the side. So I knew what the clinical part of it entailed, but I had to get all my business practices in line. So I got help, and it still took me 2 years to make a decision that I had enough confidence in myself to walk away. And so I talked to my therapist a lot. I mean, so those are the kinds of things you have to think. You're like, am I going to fail? Am I going to make it? I have this really consistent job over here, and I'm walking into something really risky, and I don't know if I'm going to get clients. And you just don't trust yourself, and you feel like, how can I do this? How am I going to stand up to like the other people who are more established in the community? And I just had to be reminded from my coach, build the skills, all the logistics, and then have that mindset and develop that confidence to take a step outside of what you know. And yeah, you definitely have to start thinking in a business kind of way. But I also say to people, like, you don't have to start a business right away. You can work for other people, right? But if you're talking to this audience of people who are maybe working in a system, maybe it's schools, maybe it's government, working in a therapy practice, but like for a government agency or working in somebody else's group practice, when you're ready to step out on your own, you do have to, it's a business logistics, and it's mindset and confidence and being able to have some risk tolerance.
And as you're talking about that, it's so interesting because, and the importance of being curious. And I hear that the curiosity for yourself and the importance of asking ourselves what next, and being able to have like just gaining insight and understanding. And it's not a sprint. And in fact, sprinting probably isn't the best idea. Building those skills slowly and feeling that sense of confidence, and also having that grit to take a leap of faith. And
yeah,
what was that moment? I guess that leap of faith moment. Can you kind of elaborate a bit more? What was that like?
The leap of faith moment for me was when my dog passed away. So I remember it so clearly. It was January 2022. And what I had decided, because I had already worked with my business coach. I already had this practice up and running. It was me. And I had started to bring in a few people to work, but I was still full-time in school. But I knew that I wanted to take that leap, but I was so fearful. I at first was like, well, I just need to get 3 years at this higher pay grade so that I can retire on my, when I retire, I'll have a bigger pension or whatever. But so I was like, okay, I'm going to hold out till then. But yeah, my life has always really been, I've always really wanted to live my truth and not stay in something that made me feel stagnant or stuck or unhappy or limited. And when my dog passed away, I looked at him and I was like, wow, like a second ago, he was here and then he was not. And nothing else matters that he did, right? He was gone. So it made me think, you know what? I don't want to live my life staying in something out of fear. Because when I'm gone, none of it is going to matter. Well, the only thing that's going to matter is how I feel when I'm here. And so I was like, that's it. And so I had saved all of the money that I had made in private practice, besides the business expenses. I had saved it all over the course of 2.5 years that I had been in practice already. So because I still had a salary. So I saved all of that as like okay, I have a nest egg. I can live on this if I need to. And I was like, that's it. And I said to my fiance at the time, I said, let's go get married during spring break because I'm going to need insurance.
Good reason.
So it was like, that's what we did. We planned it over the February break. We got married over spring break, told my boss, and I left in June that year. And I never looked back. I was so afraid. But that moment of clarity was when Cody passed away. And I was like, That's it. I'm not living my life like this. I know you do a lot of work with other professionals like that are doing this. You're doing a lot of consulting work and running consulting groups. What do you what's the biggest myth that you think people have about starting a practice that holds them back? So, I mean, I'm guessing through this process, you worked through some of those on your own. What do you hear a lot that people, what's holding people back from taking that? Fear. It's fear. It's that they're not going to be successful. It's that they're not going to be able to do it. They're going to fail. It's too risky. That's it. That is the biggest thing.
I'm not going to have enough clients. I'm not going to have health insurance. I'm not going to have all of those things. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't even think it's about like all the things. It's just that they think they're not going to be able to do it. Like, it's just like this, it's like and I didn't even, I was scared of all of that stuff. And it just kind of like, it overtakes you. And, my most recent coach that I've been working with, he really talks a lot about there are, people like us really want to have like, do all the ducks, like have all the ducks in the row, and which is exactly what I did when I first got a coach. Like, okay, well, what are the things that I need to do? Because if you can Google it, then you can figure out how to do it. Right. And those are the easy things. So people focus on those things and they think, okay, I'm going to have all these things in place. But then even when they have them in place or they're developing those things, they think I'm still not going to be able to do this because it's that other piece of you that has to like go, yes, like I am doing it. That is something you have to develop inside yourself and really look at like, why do you have that fear? What is holding you back? And how do you shift that thinking and allow yourself to take more risk than you might feel comfortable with?
When you're talking about that work that was guided from your coach, was there kind of a cross section there sharing like, hey, like you can do the things, but you also have to address the beliefs and you have to develop some of that confidence in yourself that you can take the risk and you can still be successful. And I have to imagine even despite bumps in the road and, not letting that first bump be turning around point, but rather how do we hold on and make our way through that process? And I guess where did that insight really come from? What was that?
Yeah, great question. Because I did a lot of work about the anxiety that I was feeling in therapy. And it was but I mean, I was stuck there for a long time. I wasn't really able to move through that in therapy, even though I love my therapist. I'm no longer in therapy, but I loved her. I saw her for so many years. But I still just kind of like working with that anxiety in whatever way that we were doing it. I was talking about it a lot, but I wasn't able to take action on it. It was the finality of my dog's life that catapulted me. But once I started going through actual business development, I started working with people who were I worked with several different kinds of business coaches, some who were more based in logistics and some who were more based in really trying to understand, like you're saying, those limiting beliefs, your leadership style, how you deal with conflict, how you show up for your team. And this has been through my work with Scott Robeson, which I've had him on my podcast and I actually heard him on another podcast and I've introduced him to my audience because he's just been so good. And it's so interesting because we think like, oh, psychologists do this or therapists do this, but really there are some pretty incredible business development coaches who do this work as well in a different kind of way. Right. And that's the kind of work that I've been doing more recently that I think has helped me. Because you go like, oh, not only am I a business owner, now I am a leader, like business owner, like maybe me, business owner, but I am a leader of a team and I have people depending on me and I have people I'm communicating with. I'm also communicating with these families if they're upset about something or if something happens with one of my team members and a conflict with a family. I'm now responsible for everything. So I am learning this whole new skill of showing up as a leader and somebody who people want to be led by and all the things that come along with that.
It's interesting when I've been involved in working with people developing practices and, what you're talking about. I oftentimes say when we're trying to open a business, a lot of times people try to be business intelligent. They want to just know all this stuff that they have to do. And I say like to really launch, you have to learn how to be business resourceful. It really isn't about because you're never going to know everything. I don't know everything about accounting, but I have a really good accountant and I can really understand I can understand the reports. I know how to do all of those things. But, when I hear you talking about this, part of I think getting through that is how do we become resourceful? How do we do conflict management? How do we, And I think as mental health professionals, for the most part, we're good problem solvers, right? Like that's, it's our role. But I think we don't always do it with ourselves. Like, we work with other people to teach resourcefulness. But so when you were talking about that, that's kind of the mindset I go with. Does that fit with, I think, what you're talking about as well?
Yeah. And I think finding people to help you do all the different things is so important. And I mean, I just learned today that I'm going to have to work on wealth management. It was like I had never even heard that term really, and thinking about what, me? I mean, and it's like this idea of well, if this income is coming into the practice, okay, how are you then going to take care of your team? Are we going to start talking about 1K? Are we going to start talking about gauging what kinds of benefits my team is interested in having so I can make this really a place that people want to stay long term and that I'm giving back to, right? And it was just, I'm still learning, and it's because I am learning from people who do all these different things, because I have had to be resourceful and learn from people who, and it's such a learning curve, but it's so fascinating to me, just learning this whole new thing, and also maintaining a clinical practice, right? It's like two totally separate things, but it's been, I'm just a kind of person who loves to learn stuff. So it's been really interesting for me. Yeah.
But I think that's I think that's another good point. You've been doing this, you said 5.5 years, right?
Yeah.
And you still today are learning something. And I think, that's such an important piece. I've owned businesses now, and they're still always learning something. And I think that's what makes it so exciting, though. We're always, and now with technology, we're always learning something. So I think I think that's part of business success, though. We have to be curious and want to learn those things. And when you hear words like wealth management, that's a really fun thing to want to learn.
I know. I was like, what?
That sounds really good.
Yeah, it does sound good. We'll see. I'll let you know if it's really good. But yeah, it's cool. I mean, coming from a person who was, I'm a W-2 employee. I work for the school district and get my salary. I get my salary bumps. I get, my pension. I get the raise kickbacks or whatever. And that's just kind of how it goes. I put into my 403B, and you're just in this system. That's what I did for so many years. And now I'm actually having to learn about, what happens in QuickBooks and what happens in a business, and that I can't just, there might be profit, but that profit has to go back into the business, and it has to go into this. And if you have, you have to just do so many things to maintain a healthy practice. But your practice is only healthy if the people who are working there are happy, and that you're able to provide the space and the resources for people to be able to do their jobs, right? So it's just this whole new way of thinking about how, I guess, the world works that I hadn't learned before, but I'm having a really good time doing it. And I also just wanted to say, in terms of being resourceful, I think the other big piece of that is not being afraid to talk to anybody and everybody. I mean, the whole reason that you and I are sitting here today is because I was I'm at NIASP, and I know that guy from his podcast. I have a podcast. I'm going to go talk to him. Right. And now we've done some great things together. So it's those kinds of connections, as well as connections in your community, the people who, how are you going to get business, right? You have to be able to network. And that was actually one of the things that I started doing right from the get-go in, 2013, when I started working at that other practice. Is they didn't require me to do this, but I was I'm going to go out and network with people who do different jobs in the community that could be a good referral partner for us, because I need to know who does reading intervention, who does executive function work, who does speech and language therapy, what are the good private schools, because I need to be able to send my clients to people who can help them. So I started networking right away. And that is another part of what helped me feel more confident that I could transition out on my own, because I was at a point where people were coming to the clinic that I was at, but asking specifically for me. And I was okay, I can do this.
You're talking about all of these, I would say, both skills and mindsets needing to adapt and learn and continuing to grow. It makes me curious about also being able to turn around and looking at the path, like how much distance you've covered, and also the importance of being able to step back and recognize the accomplishments. I'm curious, what role do you find that for yourself of being able to really step back and say, okay, from, these 5.5 years, look at what I've been able to do and look at what I've been able to grow. And there's still more growing. I'm learning about wealth management here, but I guess, for some of our listeners who maybe are thinking about this and really feel like I'm never going to be able to, even start or launch, it take to really, I guess, grow beyond that point where it's like, okay, maybe I'm reaching that plateau where I guess, what's that timeline or that process that you experience?
Well, I may be a little outside the norm, but I think because I took a slow road and built up a lot of my clinical confidence while I worked in another practice, by the time I had built up a strong network before I launched, my process of going, I started and it never slowed down, but so I immediately felt, now I'm not going to say that I am not still anxious frequently about things, even like as I was talking to my financial advisor today about wealth management, I also said to her in the same breath, I am concerned though about the state of our profession as a whole and whether we will even be able to sustain what we're doing here right now in the same way that we're doing it. And I'm scared like all the time about what's going to happen to a practice like this with everything new that's happening with technology and the government and all the things. And she said, but that's okay because you're going to figure out what to do. You're not going to sit back and let it happen to you. And things do change. Do you think if you asked a technology company 10 years ago if things were going to be exactly the same? They've changed significantly. So the work that you guys are doing now, just because it's service-based work, doesn't mean that it's not going to become more innovative and shift and change. And so you're just going to change with the times. And so it's going to be okay, but I still think about that stuff all the time, right? Like that's in the back of my mind. I'm like, okay, but if I give people a 401k, like what if I then have no business, I think that I had, I guess to answer your question, I had a pretty good level of confidence as I went, but I think it's because the approach I took was slow and pretty calculated and maybe lasted a little bit too long. So by the time I launched, I had the pieces in place. I felt pretty good about a lot of things and I had reached out for the help that I needed and I continued to do that. Having clients coming through your door is, I think, the biggest thing that people worry about. And people have to get comfortable connecting with others to build, because we have to rely on a Google search, right? But we have to show up on Google in order for that to work. And you have to have a good presence on the internet. So the best and most least expensive thing that you could do is network with people in the community to help build your service-based practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such an important piece. I mean, I think when, I was a guest on your podcast, I think I shared when I first started, I didn't even have a phone number in the phone book. I had a phone, but it was never published anywhere. I didn't have a website, and it all built organically. And I mean, I think that the power of connection, I don't think ever goes away. It's funny. Just last night, I was watching, for some reason, every night after work, I watch The Office reruns. I've seen them all 1,000 times, but there's an episode where they're building this website. And Michael Scott's like, no, we're going to go and visit people and we're going to take them baskets and we're going to do all these things. And I always find it such an interesting episode because I'm like, there is such a value doing that. And it's, going to breakfasts, it's, with people, it's going to visit schools, it's to be curious about other people's practice, not that they're a threat to you, but they're an ally. There's a reason why McDonald's and Burger King are next to each other. They both make each other better. And we kind of have to do that, I think, in our field as well. But I think that's hard for people. So, I mean, I think it's great that you brought that up because I think sometimes we don't think about, yes, I know my competition. They're friends of mine. I want them to be friends of mine. And There are times that they'll reach out and say, hey, I really need you to do this because it's out of my purview. And I use them a lot, but that takes us connecting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And in hearing that, like the importance of that connecting and really the networking and even branding ourselves and being able to know what it is that we're able to provide and then sharing that. What are the strategies or the techniques to help clinicians that maybe don't feel that they confident or competent in branding or networking and putting themselves out there, especially in a way that's going to generate success for them?
I think so. First, really having a vision of what you want to do in your practice. You have to sit and take some time to think about that vision. I just gave a talk today at a conference about business logistics. And the first thing that I said was, you have to define what it is that you're going to do and what your values are and what you want people to feel when they come into your practice, what it is that you're offering. The more clear you can get on those kinds of things, the better you're going to be able to talk about it to others. And that doesn't take any kind of visual brand. That's really just what you know about what you're going to provide. Then there also is the actual visual branding side of it and how you want to present to the public through your website, if it's social media, through newsletters, through emails, through your email signature. And those are all things that somebody can help you with if you want to get help for that. I knew that was not I am not a DIYer with anything. Canva is my arch nemesis. I cannot do it. And so I've had people help me with branding where I got to say, this is how I want people to feel when they come into my clinic. This is what I want to portray online, and have people who know how to speak the language of marketing help you craft your message to the public in your digital presence. And then, I think not being afraid to circle back with people. I was in a mentor session the other day. I do group mentoring. And so in a group mentor session the other day, I was showing them my referral network tracker. Every time I meet with a person, every time I talk to a teacher on the phone for a kid that I've been working with, every time I have a coffee, anything, I'm noting it on my tracker so I can remember who I connected with, what they do, what their website is, all the things, just so I have record of it for me and for my staff, so I can tell my staff about all these people too. And they said, well, how do you just email? What do you say? And I just pulled up, I said, well, here's an example. Someone had sent something about hey, this summer camp for kids with self-regulation challenges that we're doing in the summer. And it's right up the street. And when they sent it to me, I noticed a name in it that I recognized, a person that I hadn't connected with in a really long time. And I just sent an email back and I said, thanks so much for sending this email, right? It just came to me as a networking thing. And I said, thanks for sending this email. I recognize your name. I know we've met before. I'd love to reconnect and learn more about what you're doing in your practice. Here's my Calendly link for 20 minutes. Connect with me. And it was an immediate, yes, of course. Yes, I remember your name. I don't remember what you do. I'd love to catch up with your clinic too. I've just scheduled a time to chat with you. It's so easy. And I say to people, people want to connect with you just as much as you want to connect with them, right? So it's just the strategy is just taking the step, not being afraid, and just being casual and connecting, and it works.
Well, and I think other fields do it so well. Again, it's one of those things I don't think we ever learn when we go into psychology and all those things. I had a situation. I was actually out your way in California not too long ago, and I was on an airplane, and the guy sitting next to me sold something with computers, and we talked, and 5-hour flight. So you're chatting back and forth. And I get a card in the mail from him. It's a week later, there's this card, and he's like, hey, thanks for sharing space with me on the airplane. If you ever need anything, reach out. And I checked, and it was checked out your website. And I'm brilliant. I've had hundreds of conversations on airplanes. Never would I have thought, do I need his service? No. Do I remember him? Probably for a long time. It's amazing.
Well, you sent me a thank you card for being on my podcast, and that was the only one I've ever received. And it totally stood out.
Yeah. It's the little things, right? I think it's, which is great. I think it's such a great thing to do. So I guess having on this branding thing, I have a kind of a question of one of the things I struggled with, was being in the public eye with branding. In the sense of, social media, like you've been in practice longer than I've been on social media. So that tells you how far along I am with it. But do you find that when you're consulting with other professionals, like that's an uncomfortable transition for them to really put themselves out there?
Yes. And it's not comfortable for me either. I definitely find that it's not that comfortable. And, we have to think about our ethics too. Like we're living in a weird place now where, our telehealth trainings are still telling us like you're supposed to have a very minor influence on, presence on social media and be private and all the things. But I'm like, okay, like how am I going to navigate that? And people have all different levels of comfort on that. And so I've done what I have to do with like anything you see ever on my personal page is just me and my family and my dog, and right. That's it. And anything, but like, what else would I have to share? That's like literally what my life is. And then on my Mind by Design page, which is my company, like it's really just stuff about like information for the community, things we're like doing if we are doing like a fair or something for people to come, out to Chamber of Commerce or whatever. Like, so it's really just kind of to be informative and helpful in nature and it has a very low social media presence because social media for your private practice is not really something that you necessarily have to do a whole lot for. It's like on the back burner. You want to have a presence, but it doesn't have to be huge because that's not really where you're getting your clients from. And then, but you want to be legit, right? You want to show like I have a legitimate business and I am putting out stuff that like looks professional, right? Because you have to show up like that. And then I have I have social media for Empower LEP, my coaching practice. And that one is way more out there, but like it still is. If I were maybe 10 years younger, it would probably look very different. Like I would probably have a lot more like trending reels or whatever you're supposed to have, but I'm just like I just don't have time. I don't have time. And it's not me anymore. Right. Like it never was, but so that kind of social media really isn't necessary for someone who just wants to have a private practice. Like you want to have a presence, but it doesn't have to be bold, I would say, but people feel very uncomfortable with that. And so like I guess what I would say to that is it doesn't have to be that much. And you don't even have to really show your face. You can just share information from your practice.
When talking about kind of launching, one of the things I often talk to people about is taking imperfect action. That like a lot of times in business, we think like we got to get it right the first time or we're going to fail. I'm curious, like what's an imperfect action that you've seen or that you've experienced with like, that what's it really look like for people that are scared to make that move?
Yeah. The first things that you're going to do are always going to be imperfect. Like everything is always going to be imperfect. So you start with something and you have like iteration after iteration after iteration. You might start with something for a website, and I've already gone through 4 different iterations of my website, right? So it's always a work in progress. I would say like the biggest pet peeve though, for me, in terms of like what you never want to be imperfect are typos in anything that goes out on social media or through networking, like never ever typos. That's like my biggest pet peeve. But if that happens, right? Because it has happened, we got over it. I don't think anybody else remembers that one time that typo. I do, but no one else does, people are forgiving. And what's actually kind of cool is the couple times that it's happened, because when you start working with different kinds of like newsletters and stuff, like someone might get something that says like test, blah, 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 like a test run of your newsletter, or they forgot to take like a box out that was just for a placeholder. If that has ever happened, I have actually had people who are colleagues and friends email me and go, hey, just so you know, on your newsletter, da, da, da. And I'm like, hey, you. My gosh, let's pull that down, unsend, So that's how I've gotten around that. But yeah, I think everything's going to be imperfect.
Yeah. And I think that's the mindset. I think we all have to feel that there's going to be imperfections to be able to launch, because I've yet to find that ever being perfect either. It's always that, there's always something that, comes up. And even when we do our best, that's, but I think that goes back to, you were saying when you met with your wealth advisor that you were, that's going to be the title of the episode, by the way, but it's, but with that, you were saying like, well, what happens? Like, what if there's no such thing as psychology anymore? There's all these kind of what ifs, but that made me think, the advice that the person said was, going to figure it out. Like it's just another imperfection in running a business that you're going to find a different way to do. So when you coach people, how do you get them to that point where they can do that?
Well, it's totally different for everybody. It's interesting because it's the same and different.
Right. I get it.
And it's
like therapy.
Yeah, right. So, you get a lot of the same kinds of questions, which is why I do group work and which is why I have courses that people can just purchase, because it's the same questions. But I really find that when I'm working with someone one-on-one, like groups are great because people kind of play off each other, or, it sparks one person asks a question and sparks another question. So those are amazing. But when you're really working one-on-one with someone, there is no replacement for that, because And I don't know that I can answer your question exactly because it is so different for everybody, but you have to figure out. And sometimes I'm not the coach. Like if somebody really needs like that core belief mindset shift, I send them to my business coach. I truly believe that like there are different people in this world who exist to help people do different things. We don't all do one thing really well. If somebody is coming where I think I shine is in the transition to private practice logistics and that mindset shift in clinical practice for a school psychologist transitioning into private practice kind of thinking and writing and management of people. The list goes on, but I also think that there are people who do different kind of work, like really specialize in like leadership development and core belief work and stuff like that. But okay, in answer to your question for real, I have to meet everybody where they're at and take the next steps. And that's what we do with families too. How are we going to look at the situation? You're coming to me because I know more about this situation, right? I know more about this than you, and tell me where you're at, and let's help you break this down so that it feels more manageable, more doable. You have more confidence and you're ready to actually take some steps and some action, which helps people start that ball rolling and gain some momentum and some confidence, and they get going, and or how to get people unstuck.
Yeah. And I think going back to something you had said earlier, you were talking about like when you did this, you felt really good clinically. Like you worked at another practice and felt good with that going in. And that's kind of stuck in my mind because I do think that's such an important piece that when we're moving into being an entrepreneur, there's a lot, there's so many things you're doing and you got to find what your foundation is. Like, so for you, it sounded like, all right, I'm good clinically. Like I have this, like I'm not worried about that. And then you could put that extra effort into maybe the business logistics.
Right.
And, so I think part of the getting through the imperfection is also really what is your solid foundation? And it sounded like you had that's what you built off of.
Yeah. And I will also say back in 2012, before I started at the group practice, I actually did try to go out on my own. And I did for like a hot second. I did like one or two evaluations. I had already gone through the school neuropsychology certification program. And so I had that in my back pocket. But I think at that point I was like 6 years into school psych work, and maybe less, maybe five years in. And I realized after doing an assessment or two that I wasn't quite ready to feel like I could carry this I don't want to call it a burden, responsibility. I couldn't carry this responsibility of giving someone a clinical diagnosis for the first time, right? Without having like a team backing me up. That felt very scary. And I did do it, and I went and took extra DSM classes, through PESI or whatever, continuing education, to really try, to refresh myself on psychopathology and clinical psych. And I just didn't feel, I went back into the schools. But when I started working at someone else's private practice, I had a team. I had 3 other LEPs working with me who could help. I had a doctor who was reading my reports and helping me think about things. So it was like I worked at a school, but I worked in a practice thinking about things in a different way. So by the time I was ready to go out on my own many years later, I felt good about that. And that is a huge shift in thinking from being a school psychologist to answering questions about kids and giving clinical diagnoses. And a lot, like, my team doesn't feel confident in it when they start with me. And that's a huge part of what I do in my practice, is support them and consult on their cases and read their reports and give them feedback like they're interns, right? But they're not interns, they're licensed. Right. But that shift is important and scary. And so there is that piece of it as you make that transition, as well as the business. So yeah, I felt pretty good about the clinical piece, but still, when you go, I was still like, okay, well, now but I've been doing it for a long time, so I feel good about this now. But yeah, really good point. And so the two things together, it's a lot as you're making that transition.
I also hear the importance of having that humility to step back and saying, okay, I might not be ready. And that's a really, really important step, to not just kind of take on this assumption of, oh, well, I will just figure it out, and really being able to pause and get some of that skill development in, and coming in well prepared. And so often in session, I talk about, like, how do you feel well prepared for this? That's a really important step. And I wonder, do you find that aspect coming up?
I would say I tend to find the opposite. I tend to find people who are very, very qualified and very ready for it, and are still so scared that they're not going to be able to do it. I run into that far more than people who are like, no, I've been a school psych for 3 years and I'm going to do private practice. I actually had someone ask in the chat today in my talk, like, I'm an early career school psychologist. Do you think, like, when is a good time to start thinking about this? And it was a really great question. And what I said was, it's never too early to start thinking about it. And in fact, I went out and got my license at the exact moment I could, and then what happens is you're forced to do 36 hours of continuing education every 2 years, which I appreciate. And I do far more than that anyway, just because I want to know all the things. But it makes you keep doing this continuing ed. So you learn more and more. But now you have the license, you have it in your back pocket. But everything that you learn in your experiences in schools are going to help you in the job that you have if you ever step outside of, So I think it's very important to get a lot of school experience under your belt. Or if you're not in schools, just get a lot of clinical experience with other people, because that if you start your own thing, you're going to be on your own until you build a team. Or you might start something on your own and, like, maybe be part of a team, or like part of, like, a group, but everybody's their own boss or whatever. You have to always find people to connect with who are going to help you grow or help you through a case. So the more experience you come in with, the better. But then you have to make sure, and that's one of the scary things about being on your own, is that you may not have people to lean on like that. So I have, like, a number of people I call up if I have a clinical question. It's not like I know everything. I mean, there are complex cases all the time, right? I'm not going to ask Facebook. People do. People ask Facebook, and people have answers. Facebook has answers. But if you really want to get some good consultation, sometimes you have to pay for it. Sometimes you have friends you can call up, good colleagues, and you can say, help me out with this case. And you can, like, kind of like trade back and forth, right? I have a couple of people I do that with, but there have been times where I want something really specialized, and I'm like, you are a specialist. And actually, I had one of my clinicians had a really, like, more complex mental health case than we thought it was going to be. And I didn't feel as like confident in supporting my staff. So I paid for her to have a consultation with somebody else. because it's important that we, get what we need to do right by the clients that we have, and know where you're strong and where you're not, right? So as myself or just one of my staff, I always want to make sure that we're leaning on people when we can. So that's an important thing too, if people are out on their own.
I think that's such a valuable point. And I don't think that ever goes away. I think that unfortunately, there are people who go, oh, I've been doing this for a long time, I don't need it. And I just today sat in on an hour consultation with a psychologist who's been practicing half as many years as I had, but has expertise in something that I just needed to bounce something off. And it was a valuable investment. When we've talked before, we've talked about mentorship. And, I think the idea of mentorship and consulting, anybody that's going into private practice, they have to be willing to do that. And the expense, everybody thinks financially, but the expense always been valuable for me. I've never once come out of that going, wow, I just wasted X amount of dollars. It was always where it made me better. It helped me solve problems. And whether that's clinical or, I'm so glad you've shared your experiences with business consultants and, marketing teams and all these different people, because we can't know everything. So I think I hope anybody listening, if they're going into it, community. I guess you've said that a few times today, but it's an important piece. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm starting to gather different people who do different things and just put them on my website as this person's an accountant, this person does marketing for educational psychologists, people who already know the craft, because that's another thing, right? There could be people who do marketing, but they, do interior designers, right? But there's people who I've worked with, and if I find their work valuable, or if we've been on a podcast and I'm like, this is amazing, people need to know, they go on my just vetted experts of some form or another, right?
Yeah, it is. There's such a value in doing it, and it takes some pressure off of us as business. We need some days.
Yes. Yeah. I'm I have this sticky note right here because I have a financial question for I've got an offer for her to do some work at a school, and they're it'll be this many hours for this many dollars. And I'm what's the profit margin on that? And I'm I can't figure this out. I'm trying to figure it out on the sticky. So I'm just hey, my accountant, can I call you after this podcast I'm doing today? Cause I have to go, okay, Jana, you don't need to spend your brain thinking about that. You could tell her the situation. She'll get out her calculator and her spreadsheet, and she will figure it out in 2 seconds and help you do this. Right. And that's what I pay her for.
That's right. And I've said this a million times to people. I learned really early in the whole process that me paying someone else creates more time for me to make money. And what I could spend 3 hours Googling to answer a question, and trying to figure it out on my own, I could call with a 15-minute consult, get the answer right away. And then I have 2 hours and 45 minutes of billable time. And we have to think about that. I think sometimes we have to think in that direction, because we could waste a lot of time where we could be making more money. So Jana, since you do have to call an accountant soon, we should probably give you this wrap up and have, not take advantage of your time. As we kind of wrap up our show, we always like to ask just kind of a couple closing questions. And one is if you could pick a book, a podcast, a blog, whatever it is, a movie, some type of content that you would say, gosh, this is something I think people should check out. What would be a recommendation that you would share?
Gosh. Okay. Well, I pulled 2 books from my shelf, although, you just did make me think about, well, let me keep it on business though. Okay. So I'm not going to share the books, but there are several business podcasts that I've listened to, but one I don't know this, the audience, I don't know how many men or women listen to this but there's a woman called Stacy Tuschl, and she has a podcast called Well-Oiled Operations. Now she tries to sell her business, right? Pretty much on everything she's trying to sell her business, but I do find that there are she does tons of podcast episodes, and lots of them are in little bite-sized chunks about different aspects of business. And she is like very energetic and inspiring, and she's fast, and she was a dancer. So she resonates with me. And she just is like, gives these like tips, and some of them are longer form podcasts, and sometimes she interviews people, but there's always something to be learned. So if you want to hear like a business podcast about somebody who started some small businesses and they've grown into something bigger. She is not a therapist. This is not mental health at all, which I kind of like, It's just business, right?
Right.
So there are also business ones that I listen to like psychology business ones that I listen to, but I like listening to people who are just like business stuff. Period.
So that's a great recommendation, because I think that's sometimes, getting those outside perspectives super helpful. I love businesses I think I learn more from podcasts that are business related that are not psychology. I think the ones that are just these out there ideas, they think out of the box different. So love that. Last question. We like to give our audience some takeaways. If you could give kind of 3 gems or 3 takeaways, whether it's about this topic or just about career in general, what are your takeaways?
I would say live authentically. Try to practice every day in your job or what you do for most of the hours of your day, something that you feel fulfilled and rewarded by. And if that is not what you're experiencing right now, try to find a way to make a shift so that you are at least filling your bucket a little bit every day. I would say if you want to do something different, just, read Atomic Habits or something, that's a good book. Like just making little small shifts will help you do something different with your life. And if you want to tiptoe and dabble into the field of private practice, it is totally doable. You can do it. And don't be afraid to ask for help. Reach out, you cannot do this alone, and you shouldn't. And people, I think, want to help. I think it's funny because we might think we need to be able to do it all ourselves, but we don't. We can't do everything. So
absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. I know we've talked about some of the differing areas, but can you kind of condense it down and share where they can go to learn more about you?
Sure, absolutely. So my private practice, if you just want to check out what we do in my private practice, the website is themindbydesign.com. And my coaching and consulting website is empowerlep.com. You can email at jana@empowerlep.com. And I have, like you mentioned, a podcast where I interview people a lot of educational psychologists and also some business savvy people. And I'm listening to people's stories. And what I have found is for all of the professional psychologists people I've interviewed, it's just so fascinating to hear about the different things they're doing with their careers. And even if they're still full-time in schools, just hearing about their path, maybe they've developed a website, maybe they're working in AI. I mean, there's so many cool things. Maybe they're like a social media influencer. We have so many cool people who have come on and just talked about the things that they're doing. That is so inspiring, because I'm hopeful that people are like, maybe I could do that, or, oh, that's a great idea, or I hadn't thought of that, and take a little piece of something and have it inspire them. And then the people who talk about different aspects of business, I think people have found very helpful, because those are people who know a lot about their field and can be really helpful to the audience. So that has been really fun for me.
Really hoping that our audience takes some time to really check that out. And if you're interested in staying up to date for what's going on for Psyched Practice, you can follow us at Psyched Practice. You can visit our website at www.psychedpractice.com, or following us on all major social media by searching for Psyched Practice. We'll be back in 2 weeks, but until then, be well, stay psyched.